I invite you now to stand for our scripture reading.
Good morning, church. My name is Andrew Marker. It is my privilege this morning to read the scripture to you. Today's scripture reading comes from the first chapter of James. The first chapter of James is, I was going to say instructions, but that kind of sounds not cool. But it's advice on how to not only weather trials and tribulations and temptations, but use those as leverage to grow spiritually. So here is the reading today, James chapter 1, verses 5 and 6. If any of you is lacking in wisdom, ask God, who gives all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to you. But ask in faith, never doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave on the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Thank you. You may be seated.
Well, good morning again, friends. Before we get into our message today, many of you are aware that we've been renovating our church facilities. It's been actually kind of a work in progress over a few years. We've updated our lobby, cafe, outdoor signage. We've updated classrooms. And finally, next Sunday, as Shelley said, we're getting ready to reopen our kids and student spaces. And you may not even realize this has been happening and that construction's been going on because it's in the lower level of the church. And you guys may not even realize there's a wing. There's like a whole part of the church over here. And so that has been happening and it is ready. And let me tell you, in June, I actually had the chance to give some of our teenagers a kind of a pre-tour. It was like before the floor went in and stuff was still under construction. And like the teenagers, I remember their jaws dropping because their student space is actually the same space they've been meeting in for decades. But, one student looked around and he was like, is this the same room? And I was like, yes, that's how much it's changed. It's so fantastic. My wife, I brought her through earlier this week, and she looked around. She's like, this is really impressive. This is kind of like a mega church kids space, which is her way of saying, like, it's really nice. And I said, I've worked for a mega church. This is nicer than a mega church kids space. So, guys, we want to invite you to come celebrate. We've got some finger foods. We've got the mayor coming out to help us with a ribbon cutting. Like, this is a big deal. I hope that whether or not you're new or you've helped fund this or you're just interested or whether or not you have kids or not, like, come celebrate. We're opening it up. We want to make sure everyone has a chance to walk through it, see it, and then the kids can mess it up. So that's 11 a.m. this Saturday. We hope we'll see you. So, okay, let's get to the sermon today. We're continuing our series called The Life Advice from Jesus' Little Brother, which is a funny way to say we're studying the book of James. And I want to start by asking you a question. Do you ever know someone who just did things differently than everyone else? At the time, maybe you thought that they were weird, but then you realized later on that they were actually genius or they had some kind of insight that no one else had. I remember there was this guy I knew in high school, and in his early 20s, he started buying and renting houses, like worn down houses or houses that needed to be flipped or fixed up or whatever. And I remember as like someone in their early 20s, I like looked at this guy's life and I was like, that's not a great investment. I was like, what a dumb thing to invest in real estate. That's not going anywhere. Here, let me go take huge life-changing loans out for a degree in something and with no trajectory or purpose to my life. It's like that was kind of how I saw this. And little did I know that he was actually onto something. Like the dude was really ahead of his time, really smart. Another example of this was in college. There was this gal I knew, and I remember she was so focused on her summer internship. And I'm like, that's like 9 months away. Like, you should be focused on your grades and having fun. And, who cares about internships? And then if you've ever realized how important internships are, she's actually a genius. She got jobs because of that. She figured out connections because of it. I'm like, oh man, I wish I had had the insight that she had. These are just two quick examples, but we all could think of people who had insight and wisdom that looked foolish at the time, and who actually knew something that the rest of us didn't. Well, as we're studying this book of James, James had this unique insight into Jesus' life before anyone else did. He saw Jesus grow up. He knew Jesus as a kid, knew Jesus as a teenager, he knew Jesus as a young adult before he began his ministry. And I imagine that James saw a bunch of things that Jesus did that didn't make sense at the time. Now, I'm imagining some things here, but I think it's a pretty fair thing to say that Jesus would have had wisdom before we read about it in the Bible. Which looks like, and I was just thinking about some examples of this week. I imagine, Joseph, Jesus' stepdad, I guess, was a carpenter. And so the family probably grew up in carpentry. So I imagine the boys like working on a project. Maybe they're building a table or something. And James is like, I'm going to cut some corners here. They're not going to know the difference. That part's not going to be seen. I want to go eat some dinner. And he finishes his project and he gets ready for dinner and he goes to check on Jesus. And Jesus says, this part's got to be perfect. Oh, this part's got to be sanded right. Oh, I got to make sure that this connects correctly. You can tell I haven't worked with wood. I'm just doing my best. The thing, God's got to connect to the thing right. And but imagine how frustrating that is to someone. There's a joke in when you work with contractors or work with anybody it's like there's the corners you see cut and the corners you don't see cut, right? And imagine Jesus doing it right every time, the full way, even the stuff nobody's going to see. And James being like, why do you got to be so specific about this? Why do you have to make it perfect? Just cut the corners, move on like the rest of us. Come on. Or imagine he maybe watched Jesus at one point give away the family bread to a hungry neighbor and be like, why has he always got to be, what about us? What about our bread? Or imagine as teenagers, when all the other guys are chasing, everyone's chasing girls or chasing boys and cracking jokes in synagogue, and Jesus is asking questions and making the rabbis stay late. And I imagine James rolling his eyes and be like, why has he got to be so extra, right? Where I can't be like the rest of us. And yet decades later, James came to realize that Jesus had a wisdom and an insight that he didn't understand at the time. James went from being a brother who didn't believe in Jesus to being someone who believed in Jesus to the point that he would die for him, who served Jesus as his Lord and his God. And yet, what we read about today in James's letter is James talks about wisdom. And he realized that Jesus wasn't odd, Jesus was wise. And wisdom is often like this. It may be off-putting in the moment, but with time, we realize the actual impact that it had down the road. And so as we talk about this letter, I want us to turn to James chapter 1. If you need a Bible, I'm encouraging, we're not putting it on the screen because I'm encouraging you guys to go to the Bible app or your actual Bibles. And James chapter 1 is, if you're using the Pew Bible here, it's page 1100. It makes it a little easier to find if you're not familiar with where we're at here. And while we're turning to James chapter 1, let me just give a little commentary on Bibles here for a second. We're using the NRSV Bible today. The NRSV stands for the New Revised Standard Version. It was translated in 1989 by a broad team of scholars who used the original texts we find more and more original texts as years go on. A broad team put this together, Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, and it's known for being a careful, thoughtful translation. It's a little tough to read, but it's a good translation. I personally prefer this to the NIV, which is what most people read. The NIV was translated by evangelical, folks who just have a particular lens that's a little more conservative and has a little bit of a lens that they kind of translate things through. So, that's helpful to know depending on what Bible you like to read. I read the CEB a lot, Common English Bible, but it's not used very widely, and so today, this is probably the easiest one for us all to access. Okay, NRSV, James chapter 1. We're looking today at verse 5. If any of you is lacking in wisdom, ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given you. Let's stop there. I love this encouragement from James. He says, if you want to be somebody who's wise, the secret is ask. Ask God. That's the secret. And God gives generously and ungrudgingly. There's no strings attached. There's no asterisk. By the way, he doesn't say you have to be Christian or you have to be Jewish, you have to be religious. He says, if you want wisdom, ask God for it, and God will give it generously. God doesn't hold back wisdom. And if that's true, if it's that easy, then some of us might be thinking, well, why are there so many dumb people? Right? Because if that's all it takes to be wise, you'd think there'd be more wise people, right? And I think that's exactly James' point. People are foolish today. And I don't mean in the headlines or whatever the newest drama is or whatever your uncle's sharing on Facebook. I'm talking about everyday ways that people are foolish. People make baffling decisions with money, spending what they don't have on things they don't need to impress people they don't even like. People make choices with their bodies, what they consume, what they inhale, what they click on. And it slowly and quietly leads them towards regret rather than life. People drive as if they're auditioning for the Fast and Furious films. By the way, we have Progressive, and they have like this thing that tracks how you drive, and you could potentially save money. And so I plugged it into our cars this week, and it beeps when you brake too hard or drive too fast or turn too hard. And it's just been beeping all week. And every time I'm like, dang it, I'd brake too. And Beth said, and my wife is like, wait, it beeps? And I'm like, stop, don't. Can't handle it. So I'm not exempt from being foolish, but people make foolish decisions all the time, unwise decisions all the time. And so if God is giving away wisdom, then why is it practiced so infrequently by people? Well, James gives us a clue. So let's keep reading. This, I think, is one of the trickier passages we're about to read. And I think it's because we read it out of context. And so I wanted to continue here. So verse 6. But ask, remember what he's talking about here, asking for wisdom, right? But ask in faith, never doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For the doubter, being double-minded and unstable in every way, must not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Whew. Man, now at first glance, this seems fairly harsh, right? People read this and they think, well, shoot, I've had doubts. I've had doubts when I've asked for things from God. What does this mean? Like, am I on the outside? I'm not going to get anything from God. God actually frowns on the fact that I have doubts. And let me just say, James here isn't talking about intellectual doubt. That's not actually the topic here. That's why we have to keep it in context here. He's not scolding people who ask big, hard questions. In fact, asking good questions is one of the wisest things that you can do. I mean, you can read the Psalms, or Arthur came up and talked about alpha. Like, we purposely want to create space for people to ask good, hard questions about doubt. But James is talking about a very specific kind of doubt, not intellectual doubt. What James is talking about is the doubt that comes when you ask God for wisdom, you get it, and then you doubt it. So imagine a person named Ricky. Ricky believes in God. Ricky wants wisdom. Ricky prays for wisdom. He's given wisdom. The wisdom appears in his life and he says, oh, wow, this is wonderful. I'm definitely going to do this. And he does the wisdom and it leads to some positive benefit in his life. And then Ricky encounters another problem a week later. And he realizes, I'm going to try this asking God thing again. And so he prays to God, God, give me wisdom on this. And the wisdom comes and Ricky gets the wisdom. And he says, what is that? It's not what he's expecting. He says, I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm going to try something else. And Ricky is doubting. He's not intellectually doubting. He is doubting the wisdom that God has just given him about a particular scenario in his life. He has what I call fair weather wisdom. He likes wisdom as long as it aligns with something he agrees to and something he wants to do. But as soon as it's challenging or as soon as it's unexpected, where's Ricky? Making a different kind of decision, right? And James says, this is not how you become wise. This is not how you build a good life. This is not how you get blessings from God. This person, and James says, is like a wave in a storm. Now, think about that for a second. Matt, picture the wave, in the storm and kind of moving around. Does the wave decide where it's going? No. The wave is pushed by the winds. And this is what James says is, if you're not going to take wisdom from God when you ask for it, you're going to be like a wave and something else is going to push your life around. You're going to have no trajectory. You're going to have no control. If this is what you want, this is what it's like. You're just getting shoved around by the winds. You have no direction. And the reason he says this is because moments of wisdom don't a wise man make. Or a woman, I just thought it sounded cooler to say that. Moments of wisdom don't a wise man make. Eating healthy 1 day a week is the wise thing to do. But once a week ain't going to get you the results you want, right? A car that only starts once in a while is not going to get you to work on time all week. I've got a lot of these. A parenting book that stays on the shelf is not going to help you figure out how to keep your 3-year-old from licking the dog. Flossing once a month does not help you with cavities. Downloading a budget app does not change your finances if you only do it once. Going on a date night once a year doesn't build a strong marriage. You know what I'm talking about here? One time is great. Doesn't make a long-term difference. Are you tracking me here? Wisdom is not something you choose one time to ask for and practice one time. It changes lives when it's received regularly and practiced regularly. And so many folks struggle with bad decisions in lives. You can immediately think of somebody who's made bad decisions. And there are situations that I see as a pastor that I'm privy to. And one of those in particular I love because I love when people make bad decisions. I mean, that sounds weird. When people make bad decisions, but then they realize it and they have this wake-up moment and they turn their lives around and they turn towards God, or they get their life on track, or they try to fix their marriage, or they try to do, get healthy, I love those moments, man. I love seeing when people are going this way and they change their lives. And Jesus loves this too. Jesus talks about it over and over and over again. He compares it to the son who comes home, the sheep who is found, the coin, the valuable coin that's recovered. Jesus celebrates when someone turns their life around and finally starts walking in a new direction. But I've also seen people do that and then not realize that you have to keep doing that. You got to keep going down that road. And it breaks my heart when they drift off the path that they had found again. And they stop working on the marriage that they had almost saved. And they stop going to the group that was helping them keep sober. And they stop praying, and they stop listening, and they stop trusting the wisdom that got them out of the ditch in the first place. And when you see that happen in someone's life, you want to yell just like, no, keep going. You were so close. You're so close. Because that first step was real and it was beautiful. But wisdom, guys, it's not a one-time spark. Wisdom is something you've got to tend daily. You have to practice it regularly. You don't just need wisdom in a crisis. You need wisdom on that Tuesday afternoon when nothing's happening. Wisdom is something to be practiced. And James says if you want to build a life that actually lasts, that's actually meaningful, you can't be the kind of person who asks God for wisdom and then just kind of picks and chooses which parts you like. You have to trust it. And you have to let God stretch you and let God grow you, even when it feels upside down. This last week, Hulk Hogan died. He might have been the most recognizable wrestler in the world. When he died, according to the article I was reading, it says his net worth was $25 million. And I saw somebody comment that that's because he actually lost a lot of money over time. And so he ended with $25 million. And what caught my attention was that his daughter, Brooke Hogan, actually removed herself from his will a number of years ago. And think about that for a second. Most people spend their lives hoping that they're going to be included in somebody's will. We chase security and we chase legacy and we chase inheritance, whatever we can grab. But Brooke Hogan said in an interview that she didn't want to be part of the public drama or the circus of fame or the pressure of the media or money anymore. She decided she wanted for her and her kids to have a different kind of peace, a quieter kind of life. Now, I don't know the whole story, and I don't want to paint her as a saint, but can we all just admit that decision is not one most of us would be encouraged to make? The world says, take the money. God's wisdom sometimes says, take your soul back instead. Now, Brooke has a wisdom that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but it's actually very wise. And even James understands this about money. You know, it's the example he uses as we continue in the next verse. So if you're following along here, we're going to go to verse 9 now. And he says, let the believer who's lowly, some translations say poor, boast about being raised up. And verse 10, and the rich in being brought low, because the rich will disappear like a flower in the field. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the field, and its flowers falls, and its beauty perishes. And it's the same way with the rich. In the midst of a busy life, they will wither away. So James says, do you want some more wisdom, guys? Let's talk about money. If you're poor, be prideful about how God uses you, no matter what's in your bank account. I really like this take. I think for a lot of us, we teach people culturally and subconsciously that our value and our impact is somehow tied to our bank account, tied to our financial value, our net worth, and yet God's wisdom says, hey, if you don't have a lot, don't sweat it. Like, be proud of how God still uses you. You know, God's not limited by your bank account. And what's funny is influence has actually very little to do with wealth. You know, on some level, all of us can think of someone who impacted our lives, and that impact came from somebody who was very poor, who had very little to give, and yet somehow they still made a big impact on us. You know, all of us could probably think of a teacher who on teachers' wages makes a huge difference in our lives. Someone told me recently that the Missouri teachers are 48 out of 50 states when it comes to starting salary, by the way. Anyways, I'm going to stay away from that one. That should probably, it's not great. But he says, don't think you're not impactful just because of what your resources. God can use you and raise you up for incredible things. And then he continues, and he actually spends an uncomfortably lopsided amount of time talking about rich folks versus poor folks. But he goes on and he says, you who are wealthy should be prideful that God has humbled you and actually separated your value from your stuff. He's woken you up from the delusion that your value comes from your finances, because money is like flowers in a field. It'll be burned up by the sun. A modern example of what he's trying to say here is, you never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. You can't take it with you. As far as it is concerning to you, when you close your eyes one last time, your money is paper money. It's monopoly money. It means nothing. Monopoly money, when you think about it, it's kind of useful when you're playing Monopoly. And then when you put the board game away, how useful is Monopoly money? Right? You don't care about it. It can go in the trash for all you care. And when it comes to money, the reality is it's not bad, but James is saying it's foolish to think that your identity comes from it, because it stays here and you move on to the next world. And money is good to help you do things that matter, to care for your family, to make a difference in your community, to care for your health. But it's another thing to take all the monopoly money pile and let it just kind of pile up on the table in front of you. And then the game ends. And what good is it? So many of us spend our lives and our energy and our precious effort, and we build these monopoly houses and castles. And then the game ends. And what have you just spent all your time doing? This is what James says. That's not wise. That stuff's worthless. It's good for a season, and then it's gone. By the way, one of the things that our church has been talking about in our leadership board, we've been having conversations about how to help our church have a healthy financial future for decades to come. Our church is really heavily supported and funded by people who are 70 or above. And this is just a reality. What I actually love about that is I think it's amazing that we have mature folks in this church who give generously and who say, I want God to keep using this church and make a difference here. And so our leadership council has just been talking about, what does that look like in the next 10 or 20 years? I mean, the church is going to look really different in a decade or two. And one of the conversations we've been thinking about is, well, what would it look like if we actually consider people and ask people to consider leaving the church in their wills? And that's an awkward conversation to have, right? I've never mentioned anything like that in a sermon in my 10 plus years of ministry. And the reason we've been talking about it is because we realize, some of you have spent your whole lives here. I mean, I've heard stories of some of you that got married here in your 20s, and you're still here and you're retired, and I know you care about this place. And it's something to consider is, hey, your money, your flowers are going to wilt someday. The game's going to end someday. Those petals and that monopoly money can still be used for somebody who's still playing the game. It can still make a big difference for a church that you want to and pray for to make a difference for generations to come. By the way, it's why we updated our building and our renovating kids and youth spaces, because we're like, God's not done with us yet. And so some of you, we were thinking about what does it look like to invite you into conversations about what that might look like. No pressure, we're just kind of chewing on it. And I thought I'd mention it today to at least plant some seeds. And so you can't take your flower petals with you. I'm talking to everyone again. Like all that stuff you work towards, eventually it's monopoly money. And money is just actually one small sliver of our lives that God pokes at when we ask him for wisdom in our lives. There's so many other things in life that God's wisdom speaks to in our lives. And the truth is that some of them will be things that you enjoy. God, give me wisdom. And you're like, I agree with that. That's great. I wish I had thought of that. And you go down that road. And sometimes you're going to pray for wisdom, and then you're going to be like, oh, shoot. Oh, that's really hard. That's an awkward conversation. I'm not sure about that one. And so, guys, what I want to do is just, as we kind of come to the end of our time here, I just want to ask you, are you someone who asks for wisdom? That's what this whole section of the Bible is about. That's what this whole thing is about. As James says, do you want to be this person? Then ask. But all of that is really dependent on, are you the person who asks? And I know that for me, man, I want to be the person that asks for wisdom. And if you have any hesitation to that question, I want to help you visualize something. I want you to picture for a moment what a wiser you would look like. And let me give some things for you to think about. Picture a version of you that's wiser with money. I know we just talked about it. It's not actually the point of this, but it's just a big one that people are unwise with. Picture a version of you that's wise with money. What is that version of you like? Picture a version of you that's wiser with your kids, or with your spouse, or with your relationships. What does that person look like? Picture a version of you that's wiser with conflict. It's tough today. Picture a version of you that's wiser with your time, with your words, with your emotions, wiser with your faith. That version of you that you're picturing, guys, it doesn't happen by accident. That person happens on purpose when you ask for wisdom. It doesn't come from scrolling. It doesn't come from venting. It doesn't come from getting lucky on one wise insight in a moment of crisis. It comes from asking and asking and asking it again and saying to God, God, I need your wisdom more than I need to be right. God, I need your wisdom, and I need your voice to be louder than theirs. God, I need your voice to be louder than mine. The thing is, wisdom is not a personality trait. You're not born with it. James says, oh, you get it when you ask for it. And so may you be someone who asks for it. And maybe today's the day you stop trying to figure it all out on your own. And maybe today's the day you start asking again. And maybe, just maybe, there's a wiser you right around the corner. Would you pray with me? God, you said that if we ask for wisdom, you give it. And God, you give it generously. God, you give it ungrudgingly. God, you give it without shaming us for needing help. And so today we're asking, not just for quick answers, but for the kind of wisdom that shapes who we're becoming. God, give us hearts that are open to your voice, even when it challenges us, even when it's quiet, even when it costs us something. And gently lead us back to you. And so, God, help us be people who ask and who listen and who live like you might actually know what's best for us. And so we trust you, Lord. And we want your wisdom, not just for today, but for every part